Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is week 48, Hepburn versus Hepburn, round 1, cat fight.
Completely unintentional, I should say. We did not plan that out. It just kind of coincided that there happens to be cats playing a very large role in both of our films today by both of our leading ladies.
But we have actually kind of been planning this episode, or this what will turn out to be a short series of episodes, for a while. Ever since one fateful day when Alex texted me, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe people actually think that Audrey Hepburn is better than Katharine Hepburn." And I was like, hold up, you can't just throw that blanket out there. We need to talk. And so then our little friendly feud began. But like we said last week, there's really not going to be a winner in this. It's just kind of fun to pit these two incredibly talented actresses together just because they share a last name. But they do not share any kind of lineage or family ties.
That we know of.
Well, yeah, that anyone has bothered to bring up. I feel like someone would have figured that out and made a big deal about it.
I'm sure if they had ran like a 23andMe test, not a sponsor, like they would have found some common ancestry. Like that would not have shocked me. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, they are not related. But it is an interesting chance this week to take a look at a set of actresses instead of like directors or writers or other kinds of filmmakers, and see the style and the class that they bring to their films and the personality that they have just as people that bubbles over into the characters they present.
Yeah, but let's get into what we actually do know about these actresses, and I guess we'll just each take our respective preferred actress. So Alex, start us off with the great lady Katharine Hepburn.
Yes, so Katharine Hepburn was born in a well-to-do Connecticut family in 1907, and eventually she pursued a acting career, and eventually she broke into theater, and then eventually into film with 1932's Bill of Divorcement. In 1938, she starred in Bringing Up Baby, which did not fare well out of the gate and led to her being labeled, along with several other actors and actresses in Hollywood, as box office poison in a famous article that came out in 1938. And she kind of had a rough patch for a little bit there. But then she had a strong resurgence, and she came back with a lot of really great films like The Philadelphia Story and The African Queen, all of which we'll probably talk about at some point in later rounds of Hepburn versus Hepburn. But she does have a very long and storied career that's fantastic throughout. Even later in life, she would go on to make On Golden Pond, which is a great movie, and she's like almost like 80 in it. She's quite old when it comes out. So she's had a very long storied career with a lot of fantastic films made throughout the golden age of Hollywood. And clearly I love her personality because I'm willing to fight my best friend about it.
Yeah, and her story also features pants quite heavily, and we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, lots of pants. You gotta think about that.
But moving about 2 decades later, Audrey Hepburn was born in Belgium to actually a noble family who I think by the time she was born was actually fairly poor, but just they had noble blood. And her father eventually left their family, which was pretty traumatic for Audrey, as you can imagine. And then in the 40s, she actually survived Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. And a lot of people think that the scarcity of food and her malnourishment and also her heavy ballet training as a child kind of, I don't want to say stunted her growth in a way, but kind of, left her with a very now iconic slim figure, which was actually kind of controversial because that was not the typical, idyllic woman figure by the time that she was gaining popularity.
Yeah, that's coming off the tails of like the Marilyn Monroe years with the blonde bombshells. And then here comes Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah, very, very different, but now an icon in her own right. And as far as acting, she hit it big with Gigi on Broadway, and then Her first breakout feature film was Roman Holiday. And then after Roman Holiday, another giant hit for her was Sabrina. And that's actually kind of the film where she found a costume designer who actually found a way to make clothing that
works best for her body type.
Yeah, that played best to her figure, and again was kind of, she worked with him pretty much through the rest of her career, and it created so many iconic costumes and looks that Audrey Hepburn is so famous for nowadays. Some looks that are more famous than her movies themselves.
And so, of course, our first film today is the Katharine Hepburn film, just because it comes first in chronologically. Bringing Up Baby from 1938. It was directed by Howard Hawks, and like I said before, it was initially a huge flop. Nobody liked it at first. It was a critical failure. It was a box office failure. Everyone did not like it, and then eventually it becomes a classic. And now it's widely considered to be one of Howard Hawks' best films, and counted by many as the best one of the best comedies ever made, and by some as one of the best films ever made. And it certainly is really entertaining. I really enjoyed it. I know Jonathan was almost surprised by how much he enjoyed it, and it is really worth a watch.
And then following that, in 1961, we have Breakfast at Tiffany's, starring Audrey Hepburn, of course, directed by Blake Edwards, based on a book by Truman Capote, who was very huge as far as writing in this time period. And it actually won at the Oscars the Best Score and Best Song, and was nominated for Best Actress, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Color Set Direction, because color and black and white set direction were different categories in that time. And I think there were several other categories that were split up into black and white. Like, I think there was color and black and white drama film or something like that.
Yeah. I'm almost willing to say that cinematography, just based on a guess, without actually looking up, was probably split.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Like, that makes sense. But it's not something that I thought about before we had to look it up this week. Because we live in a period now where almost everything is in color, and the occasional movie that comes out in black and white, like, The Artist, is not treated any differently. It's just put in the same category.
Yeah, and even some movies that, because black and white is starting to make a resurgence. So movies that if the director might maybe prefer them in black and white, like Mad Max Fury Road or Logan, they, have to come out in color first, and then you kind of tack on black and white, which is kind of sad. I wish people would just kind of go gutsy and just put out more black and white films. Do your modernly set film in black and white, because it's it's such a beautiful way to portray, especially drama, but really any category, as we saw with The Great Dictator, which was comedy but black and white, which was kind of a subversion of expectation.
Yeah. If only you could get the people with the money to pay for it, which is always the problem, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dig into this Bringing Up Baby from 1938. And that's a bit of a terrible pun there, because our main character, played by Cary Grant, is an archaeologist. And of course, I'm not entirely sure I remember his name, because I'm not entirely sure it matters. But his life goal is to complete
David.
David.
His cast listing is just David. That's
Yes.
all you need to know.
He
David
doesn't
and
even
Susan.
Need last name. It's pretty. I mean, these are characters who are embodied performances of their actors. They're less so than they are characters in their own right.
Yeah, it's basically Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn.
Yeah,
just filming them interact.
Yeah, just watching them have at it in a comedic arena, which is great to watch. But anyway, his life goal is to complete this brontosaurus, and he's kind of a put upon man. His fiance / assistant is really, really uptight, super straight laced. They're going to get married in a very formal way, but they're like not going to have any kids or do any kid making activities,
which he seemed slightly dejected about, but not enough to really argue about it.
Yeah, because he's a beaten down guy. He's not he's not outgoing in any way. He can barely get out a full sentence, which causes a lot of the problems over the course of the film. But at the same time that he's trying to complete this brontosaurus, he's trying to get funding for his museum, which is one of the things that's going to help him complete his brontosaurus and keep the museum going, of course. And to do that, he needs to talk to a lawyer who represents a very rich person who's considering donating money to the museum. And of course, when he goes to the golf course with this lawyer to talk about the situation, he's no good at golf, and he chips his golf ball onto another, either into the rough or onto another golf course itself, onto another hole. But either way, wherever it lands, Katharine Hepburn's character shows up, Susan, and just starts playing it like it's hers. And from there, we're kind of off to the races as these two interfere in each other's lives. Susan is enamored with David, and David is burdened by Susan's continued presence in his life, as they both kind of seem to screw things up for each other. David seems to think that Susan screws everything up for him, but really that blame has to be shared because David screws a lot of it up on his own. And they interact, and it turns out Katharine is the niece or Susan is the niece of the rich lady who might want to donate all the money to the museum. So they end up there as well, but not before picking up a gift from Susan's brother, who has been traveling in either Africa or South America. I'm not sure which one, but either one, he has sent back Baby, but it's not a baby, it's a leopard named Baby. Hence the title, Bringing Up Baby. So now...
Which is very confusing until you see any of the poster art or anything that has the leopard on it.
Yeah. No, it's not at all what I thought this movie was about. But but now they have a big cat. They have a bone, and they go to a house with a rich older woman who's considering donating the money. Her suitor / boyfriend, I'm not entirely sure. They seem to have a romantic relationship of sorts, who is a big game hunter. And then, of course, you have a dog. So you have a dog, a bone, a cat, a put-upon archaeologist who's maybe insane, and Susan's character played by Katharine Hepburn. You have the rich older woman. You have the drunk groundskeeper. You have the big gamekeeper. You have the straight-laced maidservant. And they're just kind of all put into a house, all chasing after their own ends, and things get crazy. And it's just all setups for jokes and ways to explore these characters chasing after their respective goals. Susan wanting to get with David, Cary Grant's character, David wanting to get his bone back, the older couple just kind of to want to have a normal night. The leopard just wants to leopard, I think. I'm not entirely sure. Just kind of leopards around. And of course, we have complications thrown into the mix, such as David's supposed fiance constantly calling him, and of course, the dog buries the bone, and nobody knows where it is.
As dogs are wont to do.
Yes, so they just kind of follow the dog around everywhere, waiting for him to dig the bone back up, which is pretty funny. And of course, there's a nearby circus that happens to have another leopard that it has to be sent to a pound to be put down because it's attacked too many trainers. And of course, now there is 2 leopards in the mix, and there's some leopard switcheroos going on. It's all so madcap. It is a screwball comedy by definition. It's maybe not the quintessential screwball comedy like.
It happened one night.
Like It Happened One Night, but in terms of the talent's performances in this movie, it's just stellar.
It's solid, yeah.
Like Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn are at the tops of their games, and obviously Katharine Hepburn is glorious in this film. She's really, really good. Cary Grant has other films he's better in as a comedian, but this might be Katharine Hepburn's best comedic role.
Yeah. Cary Grant's performance in this film is very similar to what we saw in Arsenic and Old Lace, where he's kind of the sane man, the straight man in the middle of all the craziness, and just kind of like his head is spinning and he's trying to figure out what's going on and keep up. Until
he eventually goes insane too.
Yeah, until he just like gives up with it. But I have a question as far as the leopard switcheroo. Was it one leopard that kind of parent trapped and twinned itself?
It was one leopard. It was one leopard actor. It was two leopard characters.
Right.
Yeah, so it is one. Well, I mean, looking at it from like a producer or a director standpoint, do you want one leopard on set or do you want two leopards on set?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I just wanted to make sure because you don't know how crazy those classic Hollywood people were. I mean, they put a live leopard on set for one thing.
Yes, this is true. And it's actually a lot of the shots are done very particularly with the leopard to make sure that the actors are safe. A lot of times the leopard is behind a glass wall. Or, for instance...
Sometimes not totally subtly.
Yeah, no, it shows in some of the shots.
But we've even seen that with, like, Raiders of the Lost Ark with the snakes and stuff. So this is like an age-old tradition. Yeah,
no, it's nothing. It's definitely not, like, a big faux pas or anything. It definitely works for what it is. And anybody who sees that, who's, like, a real actor would be in there with a leopard... needs to go sit in a room with a leopard by themselves for an hour and see how that goes.
No matter how tame the leopard is.
No matter how tame the leopard is. Although, Katharine Hepburn and the leopard, Nisa the leopard, who was a famous movie leopard and appeared in many other films, or a few other films. A lot of films for a leopard. More than the average leopard. Easily more than the average leopard.
Now we're into, like, leopard film statistics.
Of course. What is the Filmlings episode if we don't go into leopard film statistic? We've talked about a lot of different animal actors over the course of the show. I would love to have like a Filmlings Animal Actor Hall of Fame.
Tweet us your favorite animal we've talked about on the podcast.
Favorite animal. We told you guys it was a cat fight. But anyway, Katharine Hepburn and the leopard, Nisa, got along really well. They liked each other a lot. There was one instance where Katharine Hepburn had weights in her skirt, and this is something they would do a lot with skirts in films. Even up to today, they'll do something like this, where they put weights in the bottom of the skirt so it'll move better on screen, and it won't crumple up, it won't ride up or anything like that. But the leopard was going after the weights in the skirt to play with them, and the animal trainer got a little itchy and hooked the leopard with one of those things you see dog catchers carrying that looks like it's used to clean a pool. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, like a crook, not a net. It's like a net without the net bit. Right. But but other than that, they got along really well. The leopard apparently even loved. I shouldn't say the leopard. Nisa. That seems rude. Nisa even loved Katharine's perfume. She really liked smelling Katharine. So they got along great. Cary Grant did not like the leopard. Did not like the leopard at all. He was totally terrified of him, of her, my bad, of the leopard. Not that I can really blame him. I would be a little nervous too.
That's more of a natural reaction.
This is definitely a natural reaction. But he was definitely really cautious about it. Any time where the leopard has to get close to Cary Grant, you'll notice that either it's behind a glass wall or they cut into a tight shot and they have a stand-in instead of Cary Grant, who's there in Cary Grant's role to be close to the leopard. And in fact, at one point, Katharine pranked Cary Grant by putting a stuffed leopard in his trailer, in his dark trailer, so he would open it and see the outline of a leopard and freak out. But apparently, they still got along at the end of the day, and they ended up making a very funny film, even though they didn't get the credit they really deserved when it just came out. But, like we said before, if there's anything we've learned on the Filmings podcast, it's A, all directors are nuts. B, not all classic movies are great when they first come out. And it's the movies that stand the test of time that really become classics. And especially the ones that come back from terrible releases to become classics that are kind of almost the most interesting to study and enjoy later on.
Yeah, so remember that when you're reading Rotten Tomatoes reviews of movies coming out this weekend or any weekend modernly.
Unless it's the Emoji Movie.
Yeah, I think we can stick by that rating.
Normally I don't try to diss movies on here, but that seems like an unbold
Pretty universal
assessment.
Yeah.
That's
But
like
speaking
saying
of
the
good
sky
comedy,
is blue.
right? But speaking of good comedy, let's talk about some of the techniques in this film because it is screwball comedy. We have seen some screwball comedy in It Happened One Night, Arsenic and Old Lace, and some others, but I don't think we really got into kind of the nitty gritty of how some of these jokes are crafted.
Yeah. So the first concept I want to talk about is called the topper, and it's basically the concept of telling a joke in three parts or telling a joke three times. And if you don't know, three is kind of a number of completion, and for whatever reason, be it cultural or social or some weird instinctual thing that we have as humans, we really like things that come in threes. They feel complete, they feel finished. So if you're going to tell a joke, tell it in a set of three. And here's an example to kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. There's a point in Bringing Up Baby where Katharine Hepburn is sitting at a bar and she doesn't know Cary Grant is there. They're bumping into each other coincidentally again, which happens so many times that you completely excuse the coincidences because it's just inconvenient for both characters. But she's sitting at a bar and the bartender is showing her this sleight of hand trick with an olive. And Katharine Hepburn is convinced that she can do it and tries to do it. And she drops the olive and she doesn't know where it goes and she realizes it lands on the floor. And that's our first joke because rather than me telling you it, it's much more funny to watch. Our second joke is when Cary Grant comes along and slips on the olive and falls on his butt, which it's a pratfall. It's a big movement. Cary Grant's great at big movements. It's really funny to watch. And then, of course, we have
Chaplin-esque, like physical comedy.
Yeah. So we have our first joke, the dropped olive. We have our second joke, which is a play on the first joke. And then we have our topper, which comes in and dominates the last two jokes, which is Katharine Hepburn looking at Cary Grant and saying, "Oh, you sat on your hat." Or why are you sitting on your hat, or something along that line. So you have,
and then he picks up a crumpled hat.
Yeah. So you have your first joke, your setup joke, your twist joke, your second joke with the same concept, and then you have your topper. And of course, I can't imagine anything drier than someone explaining how a joke works. So I apologize for that, but that's kind of the mechanic of setting that up. And if you do this in a film, which is what all these great old screwball comedies do, like It Happened One Night, it gives a really good rhythm to the jokes. It makes the jokes feel complete, that they come in sets, and it doesn't leave anything dangling. It also makes for a more guaranteed laugh. If 2/3 of your jokes are coming off of a pre-established joke, it's a higher chance of success.
Yeah. And of course, like with the topper, as we've talked about with other comedy episodes, it's always that subversion of expectation. When you're waiting for one thing and then you get something that's totally unrelated or that comes at the situation from a different direction, that is always kind of the funniest because there's a little bit of a shock value to it at like its most basic level. It's like, oh, I didn't expect that. So, if you have, and especially like putting two that relate to each other. So you have olive joke. Oh, you sat on your hat. So you're setting it up like expecting to follow through and then just totally undercutting it, which is kind of a basis for comedy.
Yeah, exactly. And another technique that isn't specifically specific. Another technique that is
generic.
Yeah, another technique that isn't specific to comedy but applies to drama too, and more serious, straight-laced storytelling is the idea of giving your characters something to do. And this is both kind of like a directing tip and a writing tip at the same time. And that if you give your characters something physically to do while they're delivering their lines, they feel more natural in it. And there's more chances for them to act rather than if they have to just stand there. So there's a difference between someone standing there and delivering a joke and somebody delivering a joke while dialing the phone, or delivering a joke while they get up from the table and follow the dog that they think has buried their prized bone around the house. And
Yeah,
especially if you have a physical actor on your hands like Cary Grant.
Yeah, and if I can just kind of bring in a little bit of my high school acting stuff, training, whatever. What we used to call this is a toothpick, basically. It's like having something in your hands, makes it less awkward for the actor who's standing there just like giving lines, but it also gives some sort of visual interest. So we saw this with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington when he's trying to flirt with the politician's daughter, and he's got his hat and he's moving it around, and that actually becomes the whole joke, is just this little prop that he has. We're only following it with the camera, like we talked about, as he drops it and constantly picks it up. We're not even looking at the lines because the action is more interesting than the lines sometimes. And of course, this film, being a screwball comedy, definitely employs the use of great dialogue, very fast-paced and witty dialogue. So fast-paced that this is, again, one of those movies you have to watch a couple times just to get the jokes that you laughed over the first time.
Yeah, it really is. And speaking of those comedic actors who bring life to roles, we have to, of course, talk about the Hepburn in this movie, because this is the Battle of the Hepburns.
Of course.
And this is Katharine Hepburn, and one of the reasons that I picked this movie for it being her first movie in this miniseries we're doing is just the sheer range that she gets to play over the course of the film. She gets to be the madcap girl who's in love, the madcap girl who doesn't care. She gets to break down and cry. She gets to have a grand triumph. She gets to fall in love and have her heart broken. And do all these sorts of crazy things emotionally, as well as just all these sorts of crazy physical things that she is brilliant at. There's her rocking on the ladder at the end. There's her romping through the woods with Cary Grant. And let's not forget the portion of our film where all of our characters are put in jail. Because nobody believes that nobody believes their story about them having seen a leopard until, of course, the leopard walks into the jail, and then, of course, even the police at that point have to be like, "Oh yeah, there's a leopard." Oh no, wait,
and they're all like
there's two
jumping
leopards.
up onto the bars like cartoon characters.
Yeah, literally every single character. It's hilarious. But during our earlier prison scenes, like the last half hour of the movie set in the prison,
basically.
Katharine Hepburn even gets the chance to go through a series of impressions where she pretends to be a mobster, and you see her flip the switch and go into the impression mode. And it's just one of those impressions that, and this is me going from my high school experience of being friends with actors, that actors love doing. They love going into these exaggerated impressions because they're fun, and you see how much fun Katharine Hepburn is having on the set of this movie. And it is a real shame that it turned out that it got the reception the way it did. She ended her contract with the studio after this. She was labeled box office poison in an article that is of questionable validity, but it's kind of a famous article in that it had a wide-ranging effect on everybody who was in it. But Katharine Hepburn does eventually come back. But it's a shame to see an actor have such fun making a movie, even making friends with a leopard while making a movie, and then that movie kind of not pan out the way she expected it to. Although it has become a classic nowadays, so it's been validated.
Yeah, and from my perspective, watching this film and watching Katharine Hepburn, it was very interesting because up to this point, I'd only seen The African Queen and The Philadelphia Story. In both of those films, she plays a very different character than she does in Bringing Up Baby. She plays more of a stoic, straight-laced woman who has to kind of be, kind of have her cold heart melted in a sense. And this is like the opposite. She's from the get-go, like zany, fun-loving, just all over the place, hyper, for lack of a better word. And so I was very surprised. I mean, you talk about the range that she plays in this film, but this was just kind of showing for me like what range she has just as an actress across her career. So I thought that was very interesting, and we'll get to see some of her probably more typical character portrayals later on in this series. But that was quite interesting.
Yeah, and I find that fascinating because she's often perceived as kind of being either, well, there's a mix of perceptions. There's a lot of people who perceive her as being a tomboy, which from our 2017 perspective seems just completely erroneous. But I guess at the time, like, I could see it. There were people who were like, "Oh, she's playing golf."
She's wearing pants. That's the thing I was about to bring up.
That's the really big one, right? But she's also has kind of a high class aura around her, partially because, well, she grew up high class in this wealthy Connecticut family, and also because of roles in films like The Philadelphia Story, like The African Queen, and she doesn't play like a high class lady in The African Queen. She plays like a missionary who's poor and living in Africa, but
still not a
she's
super exuberant.
She's very proper. She's very strict. You get the sense that if you had washed her up in The African Queen after her riverboat adventure and put her in a high class party situation, she would fit in just fine. And it's kind of interesting to have that persona around an actress and then get to see her completely invert it in a film, because even that, on kind of a meta level, is a source of humor.
All right, so let's talk about Breakfast at Tiffany's from 1961 and get our other Hepburn in the mix. So this film is about a girl named Holly who is living in New York and kind of has this social life that is kind of well beyond her means, but her means kind of include accompanying men around, and kind of just she gets paid to be with them all the time and be seen with them and that kind of thing, because she's got a very classy style and stuff like that. And we learn that she came from a very poor background, was kind of noticed by a talent or model agent of sorts, who dressed her up nice and made her more desirable, for lack of a better word. But a new man moves into her apartment complex a couple rooms up, and they meet each other by happenstance and continue to meet and kind of form this friendship that blossoms into a romance. But there are things in her past that start coming back to haunt her, and things in his present that are not what she is looking for. So it's this drama, the will they, won't they kind of a thing for the whole time. But Audrey Hepburn gets to go through this arc of kind of trying to get past this superficial lifestyle that she has built for herself and put a very large premium on, that has a lot of emotional tolls on her.
She's a phony, but she's a genuine phony.
Yeah, that's direct lines from the movie always help. So yeah, but this is one of the things that we need to talk about is kind of Audrey's style, because that's what a lot of Audrey Hepburn's persona is her style, and this film definitely brings a lot of that out, because she is constantly wearing very chic clothing, and as the title suggests, Breakfast at Tiffany's, whenever she feels depressed or anything, she will go to Tiffany's and just like eat a bagel and drink some coffee while looking at diamonds, and that makes her feel better. So that kind of sets up her, again, how superficially she views life, and how she's just constantly looking for the most glamorous thing and way to present herself. She loves diamonds, but she won't wear them till after she's 40 or it's tacky. Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, though, underneath her striving for this superficiality is like this real desire for a stability that has been lacking in her life since apparently forever, as we get her backstory over the course of the film. And so you can see this at the same. So you can see two characters in her at one time who are really one person: a little girl striving for stability and comfort and safety, and the other one a glamorous, wannabe rich New York socialite who is trying at being glamorous even though she doesn't have the money for it.
Right, and her love interest has his own conflicts. He is broke, a writer, basically
Are those
living...
two different things? Sorry.
I'm just re-emphasizing.
That's terrible. That's just a really funny writer joke.
It's a fact of life. So he is a broke writer living with essentially a cougar and is kind of, I mean, when you get down to it, they are parallels in a sense where he is getting paid to be with this woman where she gets paid to be with men. And since he's poor, he's not the type that she's looking for. She's constantly looking for a very rich man that she can marry and then not have to worry about money or anything. And so like they are kind of this balance to each other, but at the same time, they have things that are constantly pushing them away. And that is the tension that we feel throughout the film. So another thing about this that's kind of semi-constant in some Audrey Hepburn films is this character that she often plays where she is kind of made up into she comes from something very humble and is made into this glamorous persona, but you can still see that the humble, insecure, immature, as you said, girl kind of poking through this facade that she is putting on in a lot of these movies. So think Funny Face or My Fair Lady kind of a thing. But that's kind of the charm that she has, is being able to be glamorous and also have little silly moments and very vulnerable moments as well, where she can break down and then kind of work herself up to holding her head up high. And it's kind of, it's this duality that she's so good at playing and is what has endeared her to so many people.
Yeah. And not just her character, although that is, and her acting skills. But I think when we talk about Audrey Hepburn, we have to talk about her style, like her fashion, like this brand of fashion that has literally grown up around her. Like you mentioned earlier, when we were introducing the entire podcast, in the lead up to the 60s, like the body type that was the preferred one for leading ladies was, or maybe not always leading ladies, but for Hollywood stars, was like the blonde bombshell. And we move into the 60s and Audrey Hepburn comes along and she changes a lot of that. And like you said, like they find a new kind of style of dressing her that really flatters her body type, and it just becomes iconic. And so that's why you see those posters everywhere of Audrey Hepburn style, Audrey Hepburn in the hat, Audrey Hepburn with the long cigar, Audrey Hepburn with sunglasses. She can really work a pair of sunglasses for a really good close-up shot. And
honestly, a lot of those like famous images of her with the long cigarette holder with all the diamonds on her at Tiffany's and stuff, they're not like screen grabs from the film. Those are all publicity photos around the film that we never actually see her doing. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that some of the most lasting parts or images from the movie are just kind of publicity images.
Yeah, and that really speaks to her star power outside of the film. That people the promoters, the studio marketing team would understand that one of the biggest appeals to audiences as part of this film is getting to go see Audrey Hepburn dressed up in really fancy clothes, and putting that image out there. And that's the image that's become iconic and has become like the memory of who this actress is. And of course, she's deeply talented, as you mentioned. Like she covers a wide range of emotions over the course of this movie, but her style is just so striking and so memorable that it's kind of become her legacy.
Yeah, and just to talk about some of the way that these iconic costumes and looks came about, this film and kind of as we said, the film that cemented her style, Sabrina, were both kind of fashion designed by the same man, and I'm going to butcher this, Hubert de Givenchy, who was a French designer from Paris, and he, like I said, became lifelong friends with her. And it's really interesting because in her first breakout film, Roman Holiday, she was costumed by Edith Head, who is an immensely famous costume designer from the golden age of Hollywood. And if you need a picture of her, just think of Edna Mode from The Incredibles, because that character is literally modeled after Edith Head, which is funny because she designs all of the outfits for The Incredibles when they need something specific for their particular powers. So it's interesting that that's such an iconic costume designer couldn't quite find a way to make Audrey as flattering in her own way as she could. And so this other designer, Hubert da Vinci, did that and found a way to use her lines and everything to create what is clearly an iconic style that is still ongoing to this day. But there are some, I guess we kind of mentioned this because there are some other characters that are not as tastefully designed, specifically Mickey Rooney's character.
Oh my gosh, it's so bad.
So yeah, I guess we have to mention it. Otherwise, I don't want to just ignore it because Mickey Rooney plays an Asian man. Mickey Rooney is not Asian, if as everyone who knows who Mickey Rooney is will know. And this is kind of like in the ranks of what is now considered one of the most racist performances ever, because it's so cliche and it's so like you can never ever get away with this in a million years now. And people still hold this film in high regard, but there's like always that little tinge of
parts of it that are like,
then there's Mickey Rooney.
Oh, that's bad. That's real bad. That's bad. And not even just like offensive, like unfunny.
Yeah.
Like they're not even good jokes.
Yeah, they tried way too hard.
Yeah. Oh, they just leaned on like the stereotype joke too hard and were terribly offensive in the process and didn't even get good joke material out of it.
The joke half the time was that it was a stereotype and that was supposed to be funny. I don't know.
It's bad. It's anyway, that's the point. It's bad. It's a bad part of this movie. It doesn't ruin the entire film. Or at least I don't think it ruins the entire film. There are people out there who would fight and die on a hill to say that anything, any bad part from a movie this old ruins the entire film. I don't think it ruins the entire film, but it is bad, and it should be acknowledged as bad and appreciated as bad when you go back and watch this movie. But all the rest of the film is really great and complex and an interesting depiction of the characters in it, and doesn't show them as two-dimensional caricatures. Just Mickey Rooney, so just avoid that bit. But he's not the only famous person who has a cameo or a bit role in this film.
Yeah, there are several other actors that we've seen in other movies on this podcast, some in very unlikely places, such as at some point, Audrey Hepburn decides that she's going to marry this Brazilian politician who is very wealthy and very well known in his country. The actor who plays the Brazilian was actually in Cleo from 5 to 7, which we looked at in our episode of France in the World Tour, French New Wave, which was kind of random. And then also the cougar lady that our love interest character is staying with actually happens to be the mom from The Day the Earth Stood Still, which we looked at just a couple weeks ago. And this is a couple of decades later for her, which was like crazy unexpected to find that out. And another character who's closely related to Audrey Hepburn's character, which I won't reveal how, because that's kind of the only spoiler, which happens halfway through the movie. But he is Jed Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies, very famous. And there are 5 actors, including him, actually, Buddy Ebsen, who were on The Twilight Zone, which I just have to mention because, it's me.
It's The Twilight Zone. If you haven't picked it up from the podcast, he does this a lot. You just kind of get used to it.
But there are tons of cameos on The Twilight Zone. There's so many good actors.
Yeah. And this is, like you pointed out while we were preparing for this episode, like this is the height of The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, 61. Twilight Zone is 59 to 64. So this is solidly right in the middle.
Yeah, this is solidly right in the middle of it. So a lot of really great actors who are flitting between these not starring, because that wasn't really a thing. TV stars
character
didn't
actors
cross over between film and TV, but a lot of TV stars would be bit actors in Hollywood movies.
But the last character that we have to talk about is Orangey the Cat. And that is actually
the cat fight.
Completing the cat fight. Orangey the Cat plays a cat who is a stray that was taken in by Audrey Hepburn. The cat has no name because it's a stray, and that's the cat sort of becomes a metaphor for Audrey Hepburn and for her relationship with Paul, the love interest. And but this cat has gone on to do many, many other things before and after this film. But before we move on, I kind of want to talk about a story technique that we talked about a couple weeks ago with E.T., which is the fun and games section of the movie, which this one has a pretty lengthy one where Holly and Paul are running around New York, all doing things that they've never done before, stealing from a nickel and dime store and going to a library and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of just another little throwback, because it's kind of sectioned off in the film where there's all this other stuff happening, and then they have this thing where they run around and have fun together. And I was like, oh, hey, we saw that in E.T. So it's those little things that you pick up that are probably way more prevalent than you imagine when you first learn about them.
All right, so with that, let's slide on in to overall notes. And just some of the things we should talk about today that kind of pertain to both ladies. And I apologize if you're hoping for more of a battle between either the Hepburns, myself or Jonathan, or either of the cats. Although
There's a little bit more of a Cold War of the Hepburns.
Yeah. Really, it's just an excuse for us to talk about the Hepburns. But although I mean, I want to say Nisa would beat Orangey just by virtue of one being a leopard.
And
the other
true.
being like a house cat.
That one.
But I don't want to do that either. They both have very great acting careers. Well, they're both dead, but
Alex always bringing it back to ground level.
A movie podcast about death. Actually, both of our leading ladies have passed away.
Oh my gosh, stop.
Oh man, that's kind of a downer. But the point is that we are talking about two old school actresses. One from the golden era of the studio system, and one from the end of the studio system. Because Breakfast at Tiffany's, the 60s, is when the studio system crumbles and falls apart into little itty bitty bits.
But she's kind of, one of those holdouts, along with Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart and some of those others who kind of keep the classic, golden age style of filmmaking and acting going just a little bit longer before the American New Wave fully goes into effect. Yeah.
And this is a period, mainly I'd want to say that this is a period before realism in acting, and by realism I mean like the stuff with like the method acting where you're trying to embody the character and do things in a
exactly
much more
as
natural,
they would happen in real life, that kind of a thing.
Yes. Whereas like, you watch these old screwball comedies with Katharine Hepburn, everything is a bit more affected. Everything is acted. They embody the characters, but in a way that acknowledges that they are embodying a character. And especially bringing
it has
a baby.
A theatricality to it. It doesn't have a fakeness about it necessarily, as it has a theatricality to it, where everyone acknowledges that this is a performance, and you kind of start from there.
Yeah, and especially bringing up baby, where the boundary between actor and character is thinner than you would expect in a drama,
because they're cast very similar to their personalities.
Yeah, exactly. They were put in this movie more or less because it's a studio system. Casting is a bit iffy. It wasn't as exact as it is these days, but it was more like, you have a contract with us, you're doing a movie. But it is very much meant to be like, let's watch Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant be funny with a leopard. At Breakfast at Tiffany's, while Audrey Hepburn echoes the more classical style of golden age acting, it does deal with more mature 60-ish topics, like both of our protagonists could be considered sex workers by some.
Yeah, it's more considered like an interview by with the author Truman Capote. He kind of casts her more as an American geisha of sorts, like a companion, but not like necessarily or explicitly a sexual companion.
Yes, and it's all left very purposely in like this big clouded gray area, except for Paul. It's very explicit for Paul.
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah, that's true. But I don't remember exactly when the Hays Code ends. I think this is like very much at the tail end, but there was a lot of that kind of skirting around the censors kind of a thing. Like there's actually a really clever bit where after that fun and games section that I just mentioned, they've stolen these two little plastic masks from the nickel and dime store. And then the next day we cut to a scene where Paul wakes up and he sees the two masks in his room and Audrey has disappeared, but we kind of get the point.
Yes. No, it's clearly conveyed what happened, even though nothing is shown. But even though they address those more mature topics, the feel of the movie is still very much studio system-esque, even though it's in color. It's that tail end of the studio system. It feels big, it feels grand, it feels polished, it feels glitzy.
Audrey still has her transatlantic accent.
Yes, she still has that transatlantic accent.
Which I don't know if have we delved into that before? Did we talk about that with Frank Capra?
I feel like maybe we have, but we should mention it because it's a huge tenet of acting that was the dominant form of acting.
In both of these eras,
from the rise of sound in around 1930 or 1928, really, maybe 1927. I don't know. One cinephile's going to be really pissed I got that wrong out there. But anyway, from that time period to the fall of the studio system and the rise of method acting in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah, so basically what the transatlantic accent is, which I'm not sure if that's an official term, but it's pretty well understood. But basically in that golden age of Hollywood, you have actors that speak with this, it's not fully British, but it's not like colloquial American either. So it's called transatlantic because it's kind of somewhere in between. It's like this high American accent, if you will, like a high class kind of a thing, which it's hard to describe, but you definitely know it when you hear it. It's the way that, all these actors, Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, Audrey Hepburn, they all have this affectation to their voice, and a bunch of the actors from that time period do. That I don't know if anyone like really talked like that at that time period, but it's
they do in my head.
I know, but that kind
they
of
do
class
in a lot of
or
people's heads. Yeah.
Those kind of performances were done with this accent that falls in this gray area between American and British. So there's your transatlantic title.
And of course, I feel like because we're talking about actors, we're talking about talent, we're talking about actresses for like maybe the first time on this podcast, for the duration of a whole episode, we should talk about what it means to be a star and what it means to be a star in different eras of Hollywood, of the entertainment industry, of film, of the history of the moving image, because it's definitely different now than it was 20 years ago, and it was definitely different 20 years ago than it was 70 years ago in the studio system. So in the studio system, stars were more or less manufactured once the studio heads spotted somebody who had talent. But once that person had talent and had is kind of crafted almost by the studio system, whether it be getting their hair fixed, whether it be getting them accent lessons and so on. There's so many fascinating stories. The right clothes, exactly. We saw that with Audrey Hepburn today. Then that person can become a star. And once they have star power, they have legitimacy at the box office. And they get put into films less on the basis of the director searching for the right person to play this role than the director, the producer, or the casting director, whoever, looking at the roster of available stars on a studio's contract list and seeing who was available and putting them into a movie. But the ones who could really hold their own were the ones who kind of developed their own personal persona and became larger than the roles they embodied. And we talked about two of them today. Both Audrey Hepburn and Katharine Hepburn became just dominant stars in terms of personality. Now, whether or not that always correlated to power in their professional careers, whether or not they could choose what movies they could be in, or decide what studio they could be at, or have a say in how much money they get, well, that varied.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes that would kind of, get to an actor where, they start to have, I guess, a big head in some instances where basically actors would have very picky taste about how movies are made, or kind of becoming their own director. And it's interesting, hearing it's such an interesting dynamic, this time period of the studio system, and reading things like Frank Capra's autobiography, where he has to fight his actors to get his vision across because they don't like what he's doing or what he's having them, how he's having them wear something or whatever, because they feel like if they're bringing in all of the attention, then they should have it their way, whereas the director is actually trying to make the movie good. So there is some clashing tensions there, and then even down to things like we saw in the Frank Capra episode where, Clark Gable was kind of on probation from his studio because he wasn't behaving or was asking for too much money or something. And so he got sent to Frank Capra's Podunk studio, where he became an even bigger star. But,
Yeah.
All of these dynamics are going on in this time period. And we're seeing that again with, in their professional careers. Katharine Hepburn definitely took a hit during the Red Scare, because her and a bunch of other stars kind of rode on their star power to fight the House of Un-American Activities Committee. And that kind of ended badly for all of them getting this bad rap as communist sympathizers. And then they had to work very hard. Her and Humphrey Bogart were both in that boat, and then kind of had to work their way.
Literally in that boat.
Because they worked their way out of it with their hit eventually, The African Queen, as we've mentioned a couple times.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up a HUAC, because one of the most famous blacklisted people during the Hollywood blacklist era, where a bunch of people were charged in front of the HUAC committee, and were basically outlawed from working in Hollywood, was Truman Capote, who would go on to write the novel that Breakfast at Tiffany's is based on. And yeah, so the whole history of Hollywood is like this weird writhing nest of connections, and it's utterly fascinating if you're into it. Not just how movies are made, not just how movies are presented and digested and what they mean, but the history of actually making them themselves, because it really is a legend in its own right, and in many ways Hollywood has done work to make sure it is a legend and comes across that way, but that doesn't mean it's nonetheless fascinating to explore. And all this might just be a really overdone plug for You Must Remember This, but there is a plethora of episodes.
That's a podcast, by the way, called You Must Remember This.
Yeah, on You Must Remember This, which is based off of the song. The title, by the way, of that podcast comes from the song in Casablanca that Sam plays. But anyway, there's a plethora of episodes that cover both Hepburns this week. Episode 11 of You Must Remember This, The Many Loves of Howard Hughes, Katharine Hepburn from 1938, is a great episode about Katharine Hepburn during her period of her career that involves literally bringing up baby. Episode 22, Audrey Hepburn, Sex, Style, and Sabrina, is the only episode available on Audrey Hepburn, but it does a really good job covering her story in Hollywood and how she got there. She has a fascinating backstory, as you might have picked up from what we described in the intro.
I had no idea that she was literally, European and survived the Second World War as a child.
Yeah, it was
so
like
close
part
to
of
Germany.
like the Dutch resistance and all that stuff. It's fascinating.
Insane.
But episode 74, The Blacklist Part 4, The African Queen, Humphrey Bogart, Katharine Hepburn, and John Huston, refers to what we were just talking about, and how Humphrey Bogart, Katharine Hepburn, and John Huston had their public personas tainted by their defense of people under insight, inspection, whatever you want to call it, by HUAC, and then kind of dug their way out of that public persona hole with the African Queen.
And the last thing we need to talk about is kind of the legacy that these movies have left, which is huge, and specifically talking about Bringing Up Baby, because that's going to transition us into next week, because Bringing Up Baby was a huge influence on a specific filmmaker who would go on to, in some ways, remake the film, and that is Peter Bogdanovich. So, Alex, you want to talk us through the movies that we're talking about next week?
That's right. Next week, we're going to be talking about Peter Bogdanovich and his trio of basically masterpieces that he put out at the early portion of his career.
One year after another.
Yeah, which is just crazy impressive. He was another guy who really liked studying older filmmakers, much like the French New Wave, and dare we say, the filmlings like to do. Wow, let's not put ourselves in that category. Anyway, we will be talking about The Last Picture Show from 1971, What's Up Doc from 1972, and Paper Moon from 1973. And I believe it's What's Up Doc that takes its most that's most inspired by Bringing Up Baby.
Yeah, and it actually references that song, You Must Remember This, from Casablanca over and over again. What's Up Doc is just kind of chock full of screwball comedy and classic Hollywood references, and even What's Up Doc, of course, alludes to Bugs Bunny. So it's just so much classicness thrown into such a brilliant 70s comedy. And so, yeah, I'm excited to talk about that. It's a personal favorite, and I haven't seen the other two. And I think we're kind of flipped on this one.
Yeah. It should be fascinating. I've seen Paper Moon, and I've seen The Last Picture Show, but I've not seen What's Up Doc. So we'll be putting together the whole picture show this week. Apologies. I will end the episode now. Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people will know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next week.
All right, see ya. A weed plantation is being burned down, and then it's called a hemp burn. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was it, a hemp burn.
Oh my gosh, that is bad. It's so bad I didn't even get it.